of all, thank you very much to Luca and to Jörg for inviting me to this very interesting conversation and the following panel. And thank you also to the audience that was very engaged in the first part of this conference, and I hope will be also in the second one. I promise it's not a sales pitch, but I have to give you a bit of background of who I am and what and who Modulus is in order for you to understand the relevance of this talk. So on my case, my name is Elena Maran. I'm Global Head Financial Services and Responsible AI at Modulus. And why am I here to talk to you about how to operationalize AI governance in financial services? Well, as Luca already mentioned, I have a long track record in the industry, in banking. I've been working several years in Citibank, China Construction Bank. So I've seen how banks work, how they face challenges related to the adoption of new technologies, what are the difficulties in making different players and stakeholders collaborate and cooperate to achieve some results. And then most recently, well, not so recently, but 2.5 years ago, I joined Modulus in a mission of helping financial institutions to face the challenges of building and operating AI system in a new regulated environment, in an environment where AI and the very concept of AI has changed from an activity that was confined to, let's say, smaller experimentational activity to a more streamlined type of activity that involves a larger amount of stakeholders and hence needs to be governed because it has an impact on the society and on different group of individuals. And so we are today to talk about what are the challenges and opportunity for financial institutions in this new era of regulated AI. So given I'm a mom of a 4-year-old and baby shark is the main topic, you will see a lot of little sharks in my presentation. I will explain to you what that means. But we all here in the financial world talking about what are the new opportunities that generative AI brings to the business. We think that generative AI might be the key to give customers new excellent experiences, to really change the way we interact with our clients, and to really, let's say, democratize the use of AI inside an organization because, let's face it, it's a technology that on surface is much easier to utilize from a user perspective than traditional AI used to be. Well, reality is Gen AI has their own set of difficulties, challenges, and risks. Andrea and Mattia already gave you an oversight of what they might be, and also that not all cases fit generative AI use cases because still traditional AI plays a very important part inside organizations and financial institutions in particular. Let's think of cases like credit risk assessment or underwriting in insurance and so on and so forth. So there is, what I want to convey, there is a discrepancy between what is the main aspiration of the use of AI in financial institutions and what is the reality. Of course, we need to aim to get to the right-hand side, across the bridge and far from the sharks, and we'll come back to who the sharks are. And we need to create an AI that brings new efficiency to the business, that realizes new revenues opportunity, an AI that is compliant and has the trust of the stakeholders that utilize it. But the reality is that many financial institutions still have legacy system. Many financial institutions still work with internal silos, and the cooperation between all the different stakeholders that need to be involved in the process of building and operating AI systems is also not a given. This decentralization of processes is probably a limit, as Andrea said, not of the technology, but a limit of the organization that needs to be addressed in order to deliver the expected results. Also, if we think about it, probably the right skills are not there in the organization as yet. So workforce skills is one of the limits to the realization of the full potential of this technology. And last but not least, not always financial institutions have the right tools, the right technology tools to streamline the governance of this technology. So from reality to aspirational, yes, it's possible to get there, but the road is full of sharks. What is important to understand is that the AI that brings and carries a positive ROI is necessarily responsible AI. Without embedding ethical and responsibility principles into the technology, we won't be able to get the expected value from the same. And AI governance is exactly that bridge that brings us from reality to aspirational in financial institutions. And what are the leader sharks? Another slide with the shark, where these are all the new challenges and risks that AI poses for our organization that maybe before we didn't have to deal with the same way, because AI now brings new peculiarities to the process and as a scale that other business processes before couldn't get. Yes, banks always did credit and insurances always did underwriting, and they were also faced with the dilemma, am I being fair or am I discriminating? But the number of decisions that a single underwriter or a single risk manager can take is very different from the number of decisions that an AI system can make and its impact to the society. And that's why now the perspective needs to change, and financial institutions cannot just think about what the risks of AI are for their own company, for their own organization, but they have to start thinking, what is the impact of what I'm doing on the society? What are the repercussions in terms of bias? What happens if my LLM all of a sudden starts to spill private information? Or what happens if some malicious data, poisonous data are injected into a system and this causes its malfunctioning? Moreover, banks and financial institutions are by definition very regulated type of entities, and all the regulation around AI is something that will very much concern them, because most of their activity, according to, for example, the UI Act classification, will qualify as high-risk system. We can think about credit, we can think about underwriting, we can think about HR applications in banking. All of these will fall under the bucket of high-risk systems. And they are high-risk systems, in this case, not inconsistently, both from a standpoint of the regulator, because they will have a high impact on the society or on group of individuals, but also for their organization per se, because a bank that will carry on a credit process that is biased and favors given groups and creates discrimination will lose their trust, the trust of their customers, and probably will lose even much more business than the trade-off between performance and fairness that Andrea was talking about before. The risks are also legal and economic, because can you imagine what happens if the regulator finds a bank in breach of the requirements of the UI Act as far as bias and fairness is concerned? Or what if the bank operates a system of emotion recognition on the workplace that is a prohibited system according to the UI Act and will need to be decommissioned in the next 6 months? Well, well, this institution can be fined up to 7% of their global turnover, and this is really not something negligible. Other risks that they need to consider are things like intellectual property. Well, when banks and financial institutions in general build their internal LLMs and those models that are trained on a massive amounts of data, some of those data are covered by copyrights. So what is the solution? Probably there needs to be a way to govern all the data that enter to the system and understand whether there is a consent behind copyrighted material. And also this is not possible without the proper layer of AI governance. So how do we swim in these waters that are infested by all this shark? Where is the bridge? Well, the bridge is exactly AI governance. Before, we had a few questions on what would we do, what do we need to follow as a roadmap in order to implement this governance. And here, I am just trying to give you a little bit of my read on what are the key steps to implement a good and robust AI governance within a financial institution. The first step for me is to set the strategic goals and the ethical value at the organizational level. And I do recognize that more specific ethical values needs to be set at the level of the single use case. But the important is that those use case specific ethical values are aligned to the global objectives of the organization. If we think of an ethical bank that does microfinancing, probably their idea of fairness is quite different from what would be the idea of fairness of a large international organization that is more profit-driven. So in any use cases they deal with, they will need to stay consistent with what are the central value that they set for themselves. The second part is to really communicate what their plan around AI development is, to have management complete commitment in following through implementing this layer of governance and permeating the overall of organization with this AI-centric and responsible AI mindset. Involve all the relevant parts of the business, from risk management to data science to legal and compliance and to the different business units. Then acting on processes really enable the organization to carry on all of this activity of assessments of the risk connected with different AI application, establish the accountability layer and understand who is responsible for what, and maintain this accountability within the organization. Another very important component is the upskilling. And for upskilling, I mean both using the existing workforce and retrain them on whatever is missing. Let's think of only risk management. Now, in a bank or in an insurance company, the traditional risk management activity is, let's say, a little bit siloed because different risk managers are really specialized in one single part of risk management. I was, for example, in banking, a credit risk management manager. Very little I knew about market risk or liquidity risk. Now AI poses a new challenge because when I'm dealing with a credit application, I have to know about cybersecurity in AI. I have to know about the risk of discriminating, about data privacy. So my skill set needs to be much broader than what a traditional risk manager has. Also, the risk manager will need to take into account lifecycle management. AI is a dynamic discipline, it's an alive discipline. So all of that, you see, probably we need to wonder, do we have already the right skills within the organization, or we need to get help externally from some consulting companies and to upskill my workforce or to hire new profiles within the bank that not necessarily come from the banking world? And the answer to me is absolutely yes, we need to build an ecosystem that supports facing the new challenges introduced by AI. And last, sorry, I have to say, I'm not trying to sell the platform, but tooling will constitute a very, very important part of it, because without tools that are fit for purpose and not generic GRC tools that are not considering all these very specific factors that I mentioned about AI as a technology, we won't be able to centrally govern the technology in a way that is aligned with the first part, the first block of setting the goals and the ethical value of the company. So that brings me to describing what is our very concept of AI governance and what are the practical components of AI governance. So on the upper layer, we have all the parts that defines the roles, the responsibility, the different levels of accountability at the organizational level. This is the very top level of what governance means for us. Underneath, you have the different component and the different building block. The first one is AI risk management. And sorry to bring back the topics, but here I have to refer again to the different ISO standards. In particular, for risk management, the risk management system that we consider will better serve the purpose is the one compliance with the ISO 31000 overall risk management guideline from ISO, and also the guidance on AI risk management from ISO 23894 that Andrea already mentioned to you. The second component is the lifecycle management. As we already mentioned, AI is a dynamic technology. All the risk and all the guardrails need to be set at each and every stage of the life cycle, from the very inception, that is what also Mattia mentioned, is that stage where business and data science converge around what are the objectives of the system, what I'm trying to achieve, all the way down to retirement. This is where we decide to decommission the system and everything that comes in the middle, because once we assess the risk, for example, in the first deployment phase, and we deem it as treated, it's not a given that after we retrain the system or new data gets introduced, the same risk is to be still considered as mitigated. So the lifecycle management, also aligned with the best practices from ISO, is something that companies will really need to work with. The third component is all the compliance aspect. So companies will need to face new regulation, like the UAI Act, which today is the most comprehensive regulatory framework around the technology, but also to sectorial guidelines that are non-mandatory for the financial sector, a very good effort to give very practical guidelines on how to implement principles of responsible AI is the FIAT principles from the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And finally, also generally speaking, we want to align to internal policies. So, for example, an insurance company can have very specific guidelines on how to deal with fairness, and must be able to enforce it and standardize them across the board. We cannot have a data scientist in Italy coming up with a different answer to the same exact problem with the same exact data set as a data scientist, for example, in France, because that will tarnish the reputation of the insurance company and will probably put on a different footing people just because of their location, and this is not acceptable. The other components, it's about the responsible AI development and comprises the more technical, let's say, aspects of it. We're talking of the components that both Mattia and Andrea already mentioned during their talks, that are the principle of fairness, transparency, interpretability, explainability, and security. All of these components needs to be assessed against different metrics that needs to continuously be monitored and tested against. And finally, the last component is the capability of producing conformity assessment and audit trails, because banks will be asked by internal audit and external auditors and regulation whether they've undertaken the right measures in order to face the different requirements imposed by the regulation, or whether they are aligned with their internal requirements or with industry-specific guidelines. One last component that I want to touch upon, and that I want to touch upon is the relationship between the ESG dimension and AI governance. We believe that banks and financial institutions will only react when there is something mandatory, there's a regulation imposing it to them. I want to change the paradigm and tell we don't do that just because it's mandatory or because we could be fined, but we want to do that, going back to my second slide that said the only ROI positive AI is responsible AI, because it brings value. And another incentive to realize this brings value is to understand that AI has an impact on each and every component of ESG. Environmental through the energetic consumption of the model, social through the impact that we already talked about in case of fairness, transparency, security, and so on and so forth. And governance, because AI governance is a larger and larger component of the overall governance of a company. So if a financial institution that is implementing good practices in AI governance is contributing to an improvement of their ESG valuation, and this will need to be validated by rating agencies and those in charge of confirming ESG rating, well, then they will see even further value, because their cost of financing will be reduced, their different investors, their different stakeholders will increase the trust in the company. So this is another dimension yet to be really formalized and explored, but that is worth thinking about when we talk about AI governance. So how do we transpose all of these concepts of what AI governance is into an AI-centric organization? An organization that has all the roles that are needed to perform the tasks of AI governance. Well, the correspondence role will be the risk management, and this function will be in charge of assessing, monitoring, and treating AI risk. Then we will have the different excellence centers, AI centers of excellence, business units that are governing the process and setting the goals and the KPIs of the different AI use cases and AI systems. So these are in charge for setting all those metrics and making sure they are centrally aligned with the general values of the organization and the general KPIs of the organization. Then we will have the legal and compliance function that is going to be in charge with the regulatory alignment and the respect of internal and internal policies and non-mandatory guidelines. And finally, data science that is going to actually lead and execute this responsible AI development. The dimension of ESG, here the players will be, as I already mentioned, investors and shareholders and financiers mainly. And finally, how would an ideal platform reflect all these aspects and help streamlining the journey for organizations starting to undertake their journey towards AI governance? Well, First of all, this platform needs to put together all the relevant stakeholders that I just mentioned that make the organization an AI-centered organization. There cannot be that these different functions are managed in separate tools, because otherwise we won't favor this alignment of objectives throughout the life cycle, and we would just replicate, if you want, activities. What if, think about it, what if a data scientist finds in a credit risk assessment that their data are unbalanced, there's way more men than women in the data set, and then starts mitigating the bias in a certain way. But then the risk manager says, okay, why are we doing that if it's just for a recommender? The materiality of the risk for the organization is not as big as if this was a credit application. So why do we let data science team to work without aligning first with the assessment of the risk manager? And that is why it's important that all of this is centralized under one single umbrella. So this one single umbrella needs to contain all these functionalities. So first of all, the AI risk management system to have an holistic risk overview across the overall life cycle that needs to prompt this collaboration between risk and data science I talked about, and allows to identify, treat, monitor, and report the risk. It needs to be built around the concept of dynamic technology, that there is a life cycle, and this is important also to pinpoint the different responsibility, understand where the problems are arising. Let's think that all, for example, the fairness problems are generated at the inception phase or at the design phase of a model. It means, for example, that our data collection process might introduce problems, but only associating the risk to this specific life cycle, a manager can intervene to the right point and change the process. This lifecycle management also helps to enforce the principles of responsible AI. Then it must contain a way to decodify the different regulation into requirements and controls and associated risk. This will allow faster compliance across multiple frameworks if controls are defined in a way that they can be reused across different frameworks, to track the progress and have a central repository of all the evidences that controls have been fulfilled, and allow to report very easy to the regulator what has been done. And finally, it needs to have contextual guidance to guide data science practices around responsible AI, to standardize those, to enforce the guidelines, and to understand the peculiarity of each and every use case based on what has already been evidenced during the process. And only with a clever combination of change management and tooling and reskilling, we can truly grasp the benefits of operationalizing AI governance, mainly risk-centric AI management, international competitiveness for the financial institution that is adopting this mindset, gaining their stakeholder trust, spreading consistent and standardized responsible AI practices, speed up the process of complying, limiting the burden and the, let's say, limits to improve and to realize the objectives of each and every AI system. And finally, allow this multi-stakeholder interplay, putting together all the different functions, risk management, data science, legal and compliance, and various business units. And with this, I'm done. Thank you.